Hello everyone, today we're doing something a little bit different. This is effectively going to be a combination of 10 different game reviews. Quick reviews, fast impression style videos. It might seem like a paradox to do so many in one video because it's not fast, but whatever, we're going to do it. Stick around after the video, we'll talk a little more about some channel update related stuff, but for now, just enjoy. These are going to be from worst to best, if you want to call it that, but that's a little hyperbolic. So maybe we'll just say, the games I enjoyed the least we're going to start with, and we're going to work our way up, but they're not really in a super fixed order, so just keep that in mind. So our first game is going to be Balan Wonderworld. Now, it hasn't been that long since I last spoke about this game, but that was mostly in a video about key creator Yuji Naka and his behavior prior to and after the game's release. Now, I want to make something clear. I was being very critical of Naka's behavior in that video, but that should not be seen in any way as some sort of deflection or absolution regarding the many other key people who worked on Balan Wonderworld and also share a lot of blame for its condition. And the majority of that responsibility lies on the shoulders of the publisher, Square Enix, who, if I'm being honest, would have been a lot better off just not releasing this game. With the exception of some aspects of the art design and soundtrack, everything about Balan Wonderworld is absolutely awful and ill-conceived. It really should not have been hard to make a game that's styled after older 90s style platformer collection-based games. There were so many of them from back in the day, and so many great ones that we can apply a lot of game design lessons to. And yet, all of that knowledge appears to have been ignored, and we have a game that feels terrible to play 100% of the time. Basic tenets of level design, controller layout, general platformer feel, all of that stuff. It's just been ignored. It feels terrible to play, and of course blatantly unfinished. There are some aspects of this game that remind me of something like Sonic 06, which I consider to be one of the greatest bad video games ever made. The problem is that Balan is just a lot more frustrating. It's not really funny, it's frustrating all the time, and the story, the narrative elements are so confusing in their intent, so bizarre, that those aren't really funny either, in my opinion. It almost feels like this game was scientifically designed to piss you off as often as possible, and so I think it succeeded on that front. It's just really embarrassing that the game turned out this way, and that it was released in this state. I didn't really think this game had much of a chance before it launched, because I just wasn't sure if there would be a big audience for it, but seeing the result, no wonder it was such a failure. And I know a lot of people out there say, hey, this game was made for kids, why can't kids have games for them? But this is the equivalent of feeding your kid battery acid. Children deserve quality entertainment, not mindless garbage. If I was a kid playing Balan Wonderworld, I would get so upset because I would not have a fun time, and I would not understand that it was the game's design flaws that led to that. I would think it was my fault. I would think I was doing a bad job playing, when in reality, something incredibly stupid is happening because of a poorly designed power-up or the controls being terrible. That's really the thing that worries me the most. This is not a game that I think is going to help a kid want to play video games if they were forced to play this. There are a lot of videos and deep dives on this game, and I've not watched any of them, but I'm sure they can give you a much better spread of just what is wrong here. All I really want to convey is that this is probably the most annoying video game I've played in many, many years, and it's just so sad because it really didn't have to be that way. Something like this should not have been that difficult to design. I really hope that whoever is responsible for this colossal waste of time and money at Square Enix was reprimanded for their involvement, and I wish Yuji Naka the best of luck in his retirement from the games industry. Next up, it's Cyberpunk 2077. And maybe it seems like a shock that this game is coming in so low, but it's really only a shock if you've given in to a lot of the hype surrounding this game online. I'm not going to bother explaining what happened with Cyberpunk when it launched, because I was not playing the game during that period of time. I picked up Cyberpunk about a year ago when a store of mine was trying to desperately offload their copies that they had lying around for $10 a pop. I tried playing the game for a little while, but it was incredibly buggy, confusing. I really was not getting engaged with the introductory quests of the game, and I was getting a lot of headaches from the visuals. I had to really turn off most of the lighting effects and pump up the brightness a lot. I don't get headaches from games often, so that was really concerning. But a few weeks after I ended up buying the game, there was a massive patch that media headlines were saying fixed the game. And I can say with full confidence that they did not. The game was pretty much just as buggy. A lot of the same errors that we were seeing beforehand are still there, and most importantly, the game was crashing very, very consistently. I tried to power through the campaign, but I just wasn't really enjoying it. A lot of the missions are incredibly boring. There's so many quests that don't even feel like quests, they just feel like cutscenes. So you go into a room and a character talks at you for several minutes. There is basically no role-playing, and this has possibly the worst dialogue system I've ever seen, where the game will give you a choice between saying, "Alright, let's do this," or "Okay, let's do this." I'm so baffled at Cyberpunk because the company that made this game, CD Projekt Red, has demonstrated that they have really good RPG fundamentals, and this just feels like they threw all of that in the trash. It's fine if they wanted to make something that was less of an RPG than The Witcher, but I don't find this to be a particularly good GTA clone if that's the direction they wanted to go in. When Keanu finally showed up, things got a little more interesting, but then I did 2 campaign missions in a row that were just go to a place and a person talks at you. It was not grabbing me. I didn't really understand what kind of game this was supposed to be. I wasn't really enjoying the driving at all. The shooting I didn't think was great either, so, playing a game that's crashing constantly, no game is worth that. No game is worth that. So, yeah. Put it away. Sealed it away in the vaults. And I thought I was done with Cyberpunk. Until recently, because a new patch came out, and there were so many people claiming they actually fixed the game this time. So I figured, I'm doing this video where I'm going to talk about a lot of games. Might as well revisit this to see if I can actually complete a playthrough. And guess what? All of the exact same bugs I saw the last few times I tried to play the game, they're all still there. It really did not appear as though a single bug was fixed. It was just as poor. I was seeing the same issues with the HUD. My gameplay experience was just as terrible, and yeah, it was still crashing. In fact, it was crashing so hard that I thought my PlayStation was going to brick. I have never seen the bug report screen on the PS4 freeze in the way that it did during the final crash that I had for Cyberpunk 2077. I was terrified. So I took that as a sign from above that it's not worth the risk of playing this game. So, uninstalled, it's over. I don't think I can give this game another chance. I've given it many chances, and I just can't believe how underwhelming everything about this game is. I enjoy sci-fi RPGs quite a bit. I wasn't on the hype train for this game the way a lot of people were, but it is the kind of game that should be just up my alley, and I just really don't enjoy anything. It's underwhelming, it's disappointing, not because of the hype train, but because this company should have known better. Everybody involved should have known better than to release something like this. This should be the definitive example of how to not release a AAA or possibly quadruple A video game. I am legitimately concerned that we're going to see more game releases like this in the coming years, and I hope this is not the case. I hope this is a turning point. There's some evidence that other companies in the industry have looked at what happened to Cyberpunk and are like, alright, we need to make sure we never do that again. That's crazy to me, but that's what needs to be done. This is bad for the industry. Launches like this are bad for consumers, and I can commend CD Projekt for trying to fix things to some degree. They haven't come anywhere close enough in the time since this game not only released, but since I bought the game, and it doesn't seem like it's worth it to me. I would have pulled the plug a year ago. And that goes for everybody else out there, because yes, we have a Cyberpunk television series that came out recently, and there are people who seem to be enjoying it. I haven't watched it. I don't really plan on watching it. There's people talking about how the game is getting sales increases because the show came out. People who are watching the show and don't know about the game are buying it. Don't let headlines about the sales increases trick you into thinking that the game is good now, because it is not. Based on my experiences, it is still in an unacceptably bad state. And I will admit that I'm playing on the PS4, which Cyberpunk at this point, that was the last patch. They're not going to support the PS4 and Xbox One versions anymore. So, allegedly it's worse than the other versions, but I don't even think that matters, because there was no next-gen option when this game came out. This is all that you could get if you want to play it on console. I'm punished for buying the original version of the game. That's stupid. And I have talked to many other people who are playing on computer or on PS5 who are also experiencing these bugs and these crashes. They have the alleged fixed version. And really, yeah, that's the reality of where this game is. I don't even think people are going to remember this Cyberpunk anime in 3 weeks. They're going to move on to something else. And CD Projekt is hoping that you just buy the game because of something else you watched on TV, and that's that. The sale is a sale. I've talked about Ghost Recon Breakpoint in some prior videos, and one of the things that I've kind of learned from that experience of playing that game is that it is extremely difficult for a single-player, story-focused game to have the kind of comeback that a multiplayer live service game can make. No Man's Sky is probably the only single-player game that managed to make that bounce back, but that game's not really a story-based game, and Cyberpunk is. So I know that's what they want. They want to channel that energy and be able to make a game that gets a lot better over time, but Cyberpunk 2077 is not pulling that off. This is one of the buggiest single-player games I've played in at least 5 years, possibly more. And even if these bugs were fixed, I don't think I would really like the game that much, because I just don't enjoy it as an RPG. I'm a big science fiction fan, and I'm not pulled into this world at all. I don't get immersed by it. Nothing is working, and it really is a shame. I'm really hoping there's some other sci-fi RPG that can come along and really pull me in, because this is not it. I like and respect the Cyberpunk roleplay game. I hope that other companies are able to put together solid video games using the license, and I hope the community at large is skeptical about whatever CD Projekt Red makes for their next project. Our third game is Fire Emblem Warriors 3 Hopes. Now, I want to make it clear that this is much better in quality than the previous 2 games. That said, I think I have pretty legitimate reasons for putting this in my bottom 3, because I was not expecting to dislike this game as much as I did. I really enjoyed the previous Nintendo Warriors games, a really big fan of the first Hyrule Warriors and the first Fire Emblem Warriors in particular, and I've played pretty much everything there is to see in Three Houses. That game has a lot of content, arguably too much content. It's not really one of my favorite of the recent Fire Emblem games, but there are some things it does really well. Now, on paper, I think that 3 Hopes should have been a pretty interesting game. Unfortunately, it is more repetitive and less creative than any of the previous Nintendo Warriors games, the more of it you play. For starters, I thought it was a lot easier than any of the other ones. I don't think that any of the levels really provide that level of challenge that I was hoping. They feel incredibly samey, incredibly repetitive, more so than a typical Warriors game. Let's keep that in mind. I think it still has that same problem of too many characters feeling too similar to one another because they use the class-based movesets. They tried to make characters feel distinct, but it didn't really work. The result is there are a lot of characters whose unique abilities don't interest me, so I will never want to play them. So really in this game, I pretty much only played as like 3 characters for the whole thing, which was unfortunate. I didn't feel strongly incentivized to use different builds or anything like that. And really that's the main problem, is we have a game that has 3 campaigns. Ideally you want to play this game 3 times, and I barely had the steam to do 1 complete playthrough. And now we're going to talk about why I barely had that steam. This is the main reason why this game didn't work for me. Story-wise, it is a complete failure. Now, what do I mean by that? Because I have not played all 3 routes. I played 1 route to completion, and I played a little bit of a second route. So your opinion is going to differ a little bit depending on which route you pick, but all 3 routes, from my understanding, share pretty common problems. Really, if you're on the fence about this game, go get the demo right now. There's a free demo, and just play the Black Eagles route. Play the first 3 missions as the Black Eagles. And if you did not like what happened in the end of the second and the entire 3rd mission, don't even consider buying this game. Because story-wise, I don't understand what happened. This game is written by the same people who wrote 3 Houses, and yet it feels like they did a complete disservice to the characters and a lot of aspects of the story. A lot of things that make 3 Houses what it is, what make it an interesting story, are not here at all, and I don't understand why. The game kind of tries to act like those things are still a part of the story, but they're not. I mean, you can't just get rid of the Academy, it's not an element of the story here, and still have characters act like, oh my gosh, I can't believe we're fighting our classmates. They were your classmates for like 2 weeks, so, get over it. That was years ago. But really, yeah, I couldn't believe it. The Black Eagles route was terrible from the start. It felt like I was watching Rise of Skywalker, the degree to which things were just mindlessly retconned. Just entire character arcs shattered or just replaced with nothing. And that's really the problem here. It just feels like so much of what made that story unique, they did not try to convey it. They just wanted to create a less interesting alternative story. And I don't think that's the way they should have done it. You need to be very careful when you do a what-if scenario, history diverging from an established canon. It's got to be believable. In this case, it was not believable at all. At least with the Black Eagles. I did play some of the Blue Lions, and that plot didn't start falling apart immediately, so that was good, but I just didn't really care that much because this is the other big problem. The ending is terrible in all 3 routes because the game just stops. The actual war doesn't get resolved. It just stops. And the main character who you play as in this game, I'm not going to get into the argument about whether or not Shez is more interesting than Byleth or a better character, just because Shez actually talks, which I do like for the record, but it's more the problem that the mystery of who is Shez, where Shez's powers come from, who is Arval. Awful. The attempt to explain that was horrible. I was flabbergasted at how terrible the resolution to that storyline was. Just like a non-explanation. So really, that's the thing. There's no payoff for this game's story. And so I wish the story was not so much of a focus. I wish it was structured like the other Warriors games where they just give you, here's a bunch of maps, go do the maps, level up your characters, blah blah blah. I'd rather do that. The attempts to make this game much more story-focused do not work. They just don't work. And I just couldn't believe it. I was really shocked. It's not a terrible game, but I don't think you should get this unless you are just an extreme Warriors fan. I can't even say that this is something 3 Houses fans should check out. That's the big problem, is this feels like the worst kind of fan fiction. And that's really a shame. So, say what you want about the new Fire Emblem game, but at this point, I am done with Fodlan. I've played 3 Houses to exhaustion, and playing this just really cemented, I'm done. I'm done with these characters, I'm done with this world, it has ran its course, and I'm eager to move on to something new. Okay, so the next game is called Wildermyth, and the reason that this game is here on the list is because I haven't gotten to play as much of it as I would like, but in the time that I was playing it, I found it very interesting. Wildermyth is a tactical RPG where you have a traditional adventuring party, but what makes it stand out is that it has procedural elements, but those procedural elements are also backed by a large emphasis on story, and pretty much all of the story events that can happen are procedurally generated, or at the very least random. The result is that when you play this game, you feel like your adventurers are real people, as you see the events that play out over the course of their time adventuring with one another, the connections they form with each other, but also during the sometimes multiple decades in between chapters, where you get to see how their lives developed when they were just at home in the village. Maybe they got married, had kids, trained an apprentice, all sorts of things. Wildermyth captures the passage of time and the life of an adventurer in such an interesting way, while also really evoking those feelings, the sense of journey, discovery, and loss as well, depending on how your adventure is going. I really love games like this, and the developers seem very committed to adding content to the game for free. There also seems to be a pretty robust mod editor or something like that, so you can create your own content. I don't know if this game's ever going to get put on consoles or something, but I think it's worth checking out. It's pretty cheap, and it's a cute little game if you like something in the vein of XCOM or Darkest Dungeon, but you're not looking for an experience that is intended to be super hardcore and has more of a narrative payoff. I think you might want to look this up, so that's my recommendation. Check out Wildermyth. Next, we have the Great Ace Attorney Chronicles. I do need to apologize because a long time ago I did a video, the Ace Attorney tier list, and I mentioned that Shu Takumi, who is the creator of Ace Attorney, had quit Capcom. Apparently that was not correct. It was a different key Ace Attorney person who was in charge of some of the more recent Phoenix Wright games. Shu Takumi was not involved in those games, partially because he was making these. He was making the Great Ace Attorney games, which never came out in the West until this collection was released. So I've been happy to be able to finally play these games legitimately. They still felt very much like Ace Attorney games, but with a different flavor. That historical atmosphere, the clashing of cultures as somebody from Japan travels to Europe and sees Victorian England, they really embraced that in a way that I didn't expect, and I think they did a great job with it. And they didn't try to, paint the Victorian world as being, better or anything like that, although characters certainly claim that it is. The cultural dynamic was very interesting, and, there is elements of xenophobia in this game, too, that I was taken aback by, but I think it really works, because in some aspects, there's no greater turnabout than that. You're an underdog, you're from a backwards country or whatever, and you defeat the Victorians with facts and logic. I really thought that was interesting, and the way they handled it was appropriate. And I'm glad that it was preserved, because I could see some of that stuff being localized out of concern. But I think they did a great job, so hats off to the localization team for this. The games themselves, I think the second game is much, much better than the first game. If you judge this collection as one big game, then it's pretty good. I think at times the pacing is a little off. The investigations are not as exciting as they are in other games because there's not as much actual investigation, exploring scenes. There's no psych locks or anything like that. There is a gimmick with Sherlock Holmes, the deductions, but those are pretty rare, and I think they could have been a little better. I do like Mr. Sholmes, as they call him in this game. As a character, he was used very effectively, because he wasn't really in the whole game. He always showed up when you least expected it. Just right at that point where he's been gone enough from the game for you to kind of forget that he's a thing, he just shows up out of nowhere and kind of steals the show. So he was a fun character to have in it. I think the problem is just the first half of this collection isn't that great. It takes a while for things to really get going. I would kind of compare the first game in this collection to Shenmue 1, where it feels like the first act of a story in a lot of ways. There are so many things set up in the first game that have no payoff. They're all resolved by the end of the second game. But that does make it feel a little awkward. So if you feel like the game is dragging, it's not until the fourth case in the first game that you have investigations and trial in one case. So that's what I mean. A lot of the game feels like an extended tutorial. And so that's tough. But when you look at the games together, that sort of makes up for it. I think you can check this out. If you've played the other Ace Attorney games, you want to check this one out. I think it's an interesting flavor. They do some neat stuff. I like the jury mechanics a lot. The multiple witnesses stuff is pretty fun. So I just hope that the franchise is able to continue after this. I'd love to get something new, or at least get ports of some of the other Ace Attorney games. But, it was kind of a long wait for this. I did not come away from it disappointed at all. So, check this out if you're into visual novels or detective games. Next up, we have Resident Evil Village. Now, this is an interesting situation because I was pretty entertained with this game. I think it's a perfectly solid action game. I would recommend pretty much anybody check this out. But at the same time, I can't help but feel a little disappointed because I think this is the weakest of the recent Resident Evil games. I don't think that anything in this game is really as entertaining as some of the better parts of Resident Evil 7, the 2 remake, or even the 3 remake. For one thing, there's so much more of a focus on action in this game, but the control scheme has not been adjusted for that at all. It is still built like it's a first-person horror game where you don't have a lot of means to defend yourself, so that just doesn't make sense to me. The structure of the game was also underwhelming because I got the sense that it was going to be more open-ended. You can explore the whole village and head to the 4 different locations in whatever order you wanted. And I think the game could have been designed that way, it just isn't for some reason. And on top of that, I think we have some tone and story problems. So many things in this game feel like you're supposed to take them seriously, even though they're just as outrageous as things from Resident Evil 4. And that was tough. I really had trouble where I was like, to me this is funny, but the characters think it's scary. And it was just difficult to really know what the intention behind a lot of moments were. The atmosphere of the village isn't quite there. I was disappointed with a lot of the characters in this game. I don't know, it just seems like such a small thing, but why does everyone have a flat American accent? We're in the middle of, Romania or something. They bothered to give the people in 7, Louisiana accents, but all these people don't have accents? I don't know, I think it just would have added something. It would have felt it feel a little more distinct and interesting. I mean, if we're going to talk about characters, I guess we have to talk about Lady D. I don't know what all you people are smoking. She's not a bad character, but she's not that remarkable. I don't understand how the actress won a Game Award. She's not really even in this game that much. And I think compared to any of the pursuer enemies from the previous games, she's less interesting than all of them. She's worse than Jack Baker. She's worse than Mr. X. She's worse than Nemesis. From a design standpoint, there's really not a lot to be impressed about with her. And I think that goes to a lot of parts of this game. That said, this game did have the scariest sequence in possibly any Resident Evil game. I will stand by that. I don't have to say which part it was. If you've played this game, you know what I'm talking about. That was amazing. I loved that part. But most of the game isn't anywhere close to that, and that part is kind of early on, so it makes it feel like this game peaks way too early. And don't get me started on the actual story. If you thought 7's story was full of plot holes and didn't make any sense, hoo boy, this game really seals the deal on that one. I don't even know if they knew what they wanted this to be about story-wise. The way that it resolves, I just felt kind of forced, but I don't know. I'm not super confident about future Resident Evil games from a story perspective. I know a lot of Resident Evil games don't have amazing story or anything like that, but I feel like this one was really it's not where it should be. So yeah, I think my complaints with this game are mostly as someone who is a Resident Evil fan and has studied the franchise pretty deeply. I don't think this holds up in certain ways, but it's still a pretty good game overall, and it's a pretty good Resident Evil game. I just think that this is a relative low point for the series, but relative. Keyword relative, because I think pretty much all the Resident Evil games have been great since the resurgence to the franchise. So I would recommend this game. I just think you gotta temper your expectations. That's really all. I'm a little nervous about the state of the franchise. If this is an indication of what the Resident Evil 4 remake is going to be, I'm very nervous about that. I'm probably going to check out the DLC they released for this because I'm just curious what the hell they're going to come up with. And it's October right now, so this is a perfectly solid horror game to play with friends if that's what you want. Next, we have 13 Sentinels, Aegis Rim. This is a difficult game to recommend, but I think it's really going to appeal to a certain group of people. And I want to stress that I absolutely love the story of this game, and the way that it was told. But as a video game, I'm not really sure that it worked out too well. It's part defense strategy game, and part visual novel, but structured in a way where you walk around, and it's more like a 2D adventure game. The visual novel parts are mostly like watching a movie that pauses every few seconds. And there's really no way to change that. You could be talking to a character and they'll just stop talking, and then you have to click the button to talk to them again like you're playing Dark Souls, and that's really the only way to keep the scene going. It was a little frustrating. Now there are some parts of the story where there are actual puzzles, and those are easily the best part. Ogata, that character, his entire story was the best, absolutely, because through and through, it had puzzles. I liked the way that they were structuring the narrative, and it was engaging in its own right. The gameplay is the part that needs to be engaging in these sections, and a lot of the time, it's not. Story-wise, most of this game was very interesting, and I really enjoyed it. But I think that they could have done more to make those adventure sections really kind of feel like you had to progress it, and it wasn't just by talking to people. And then there's the tower defense missions, which are repetitive, they take a little too long to complete, there's not much story in those missions. I found myself being kind of mindless with them, and I was impatient. I wanted to get back to the adventure sections, because that's really where most of the story is. That's where you learn what's going on. So I wasn't a huge fan of those either. I guess that's the problem. I don't think that the gameplay in 13 Sentinels is particularly good, but it's really engrossing as a story. A great science fiction mystery, goes in a lot of interesting directions, a lot of absolutely crazy concepts. It feels like the ideas they're presenting, they don't fit together, but they manage to make it work in the end, and I love stories like that. And the art design in this game is also really solid. Vanillaware is always really good at coming through with a strong vision. Soundtrack for the game is also great in a lot of respects. I think a lot of the things about this game have stuck with me since I've played it, and I really appreciate what they did. They really went hard with this story, and they really deserve the praise for that. I first heard about this game because I had a friend who literally, I was on stream with him, he cried when this game lost the Game Award for Best Story to Last of Us 2. And I didn't know what the game was. I didn't know what he was talking about. But really, yeah, I think this game did a fantastic job. And not just with the concepts of the story and how they told it, but the general writing in the game is pretty good for a game where all the main characters are Japanese school kids. Like, it's much more mature and well done. And hey, the bar isn't very high for that stuff, so let's try setting it a little higher, shall we? That said, I just have this nagging feeling that in a couple years they're going to release a 13 Sentinels anime, and that will be the superior adaptation. Just the game elements to me, they weren't quite there. But I still think this is worth checking out. If you have a tolerance for visual novels, and you've played through things like Steins Gate or Zero Escape, you're probably going to enjoy this, and I'd highly recommend it based just on the story alone. Next up, we have Mass Effect. Okay, this might be cheating because these games really aren't even remotely new. This is just the Legendary Edition, the port. It's not a remake or anything like that. But I'm a big Mass Effect fan, and I've always wanted to talk about Mass Effect in a lot of detail, so I figured, let's just talk about this a little bit. If you are looking for a collection that totally remasters all 3 games, this is not that. The first game got a lot of improvements. Some could argue there could have been more improvements, but I think they struck a decent middle ground. The second and third game, while I think are still very good, could have probably used some more improvements of their own, but they tried here and there to do what they could. Still, it's all very solid to play through, and I found myself appreciating these games more than I did when I was playing through them a decade ago. I found new things to enjoy. I found that these games actually aged pretty well, and my sensibilities have changed since then, but I appreciated them more. There were aspects of the story and the world and the script that I have a different appreciation for now. And I really was happy about that. I was happy to see that. If you've never played any of the Mass Effect games, this is a great opportunity to jump on board. I can endorse this collection. It does what it needs to do. There's a part of me that wishes there was some multiplayer component, because I love the Mass Effect 3 multiplayer, but that's still a thing you can play on computers, so it's not a big deal. Does this collection make me more excited for the upcoming new Mass Effect game? No, not necessarily, but, that's a whole other talking point. I was just happy that this collection turned out, and they did a pretty good job. Next up, we have Shin Megami Tensei 5. For those who don't know what Shin Megami Tensei is, this is the series that Persona is a spin-off of, and there are many of gameplay similarities between them. The main difference with Persona is that you have a party of characters, and there's a lot of anime school life sim stuff. This is more of a straightforward RPG, typically harder, and there's more of an emphasis on raising your demons to serve as your party. Now, if you watch some of my earlier videos, you might know that I got into Persona during college because it was something the people around me were playing and talking about, and I don't regret playing those games at all. But once I started to get into the proper SMT series, when I picked up Shin Megami Tensei 4, I immediately fell in love with it. I think it's my favorite Nintendo 3DS game of all time. It is a very difficult game, but to me it's practically a masterpiece. I've also played SMT3, which I didn't like as much, but, that's just my opinion. I know there are some people who will want to crucify me for saying that. But we're talking about the 5th game here. Overall, I like the 5th game quite a bit. I don't think it's quite as good as SMT4, but I enjoyed it more than 3 personally. And I think it's still a very solid RPG with a bit of an edge to it. You have to be good at the game, you've got to pick up those skills. If you like RPGs that challenge you, you're gonna like this. But I think what ended up impressing me more was that the level design in this game is much more open than in the other ones, and I think they did a pretty good job with that. Each open world area also feels distinct in its design approach. The first one is made up of a lot of linear branching pathways, and then you get to the second area, which has this kind of verticality to it that you didn't see in the first area. By the time you get into the final area, it's a huge place where you can tackle the objectives in whatever order you want. I never really saw Atlas doing this kind of open world structure to their level design before, and I think they did a really good job here. So it was a fun world to explore, difficult battles, the demon raising system is great, a lot of little improvements that they made that I generally like quite a bit. And I'm really looking forward to doing a playthrough on a hardest difficulty. That's something I haven't done yet. Really want to play this game more. Had a great time with it. I think this is a great starting point too. If you've never played an SMT game, you might as well pick this up. I would definitely recommend it. Because it's not quite as hard as 4, it doesn't have the Minotaur in it. You might be able to play it and get through with it. I think if I have any criticisms, is that the story is a little lean. They do a good job of not having too many cutscenes, but I feel like they could have been a little more. I feel like there needed to be a little more connective tissue between some elements of the story, but I like it overall. It's a continuation of ideas and themes that were in SMT3, but better connected to the overall law and chaos dichotomy that the series is based on. And I find all that stuff really interesting, so I was happy. Hopefully Atlas considers making some kind of expansion for this game, because I had a really fun time with it, and I'd love to see more. I just hope that they don't decide to screw everybody over and force them to buy the game again. And lastly, we have Xenoblade Chronicles 3. Now, I have to admit, I was really nervous when Nintendo announced they were moving the release date up by a few months, but I think it paid off. Xenoblade 3 is yet another fantastic example of blending what makes Western RPGs great with what makes Japanese RPGs great. We have a wide open world with interesting places to explore, tons of side quests that develop the locations that they take place in, and the NPCs even have their own story arcs to degrees, and you want to develop all that stuff further. But also we have a really entertaining combat system that prioritizes classes, battle roles, using the right abilities at the right times, and it's really open-ended. There's so many options, so many ways to go about doing a battle in this game. A lot of preparation that you can do before you fight, but you're still really flexible once you're in it. From a gameplay perspective, the only real problem that I have is that they were a little too generous with bonus XP. It is possible to over-level yourself pretty quickly if you use that stuff, but you don't have to. It's optional. I would like for them to adjust that in a future patch, maybe, but I don't think it's a deal breaker, because even if you're too strong for a lot of the quests you're supposed to be doing, I still found them pretty compelling. This game also really tries to cut down on the tedium that you see in a lot of RPGs compared to the previous ones. Collecting the right items and trying to find the right loot, it's never been easier than it's been in this game. So I give them a hats off for that as well. They respect your time in a game that's already very, very large. Story-wise, I had a pretty good time as well. It's true that this game has a lot more references to Xenoblade 1 and 2 up front and in your face, but the ultimate story that this game is telling doesn't really rely that much on knowledge of the previous game's events. So you could play this game on its own and more or less follow what's going on. Of course, the other Xenoblade games are on Nintendo Switch, and so, I would recommend them because I think they're all great. But if you have to start with 3, don't worry too much about that stuff. They really tried to take the best elements of the previous 2 games and fuse them together. And we have this sort of synthesized new Xenoblade experience that I think will appeal to people who like everything that's been done with Xenoblade so far. And that's certainly not an easy task, and I really commend them for doing it. I'm really looking forward to seeing what kind of new content is going to come out as part of the Season Pass, and really whatever Monolith Soft ends up making next, I'm going to be there to support it, because Xenoblade Chronicles has been one of my favorite new series from the past 10 years. And I think if you're an RPG fan, you have to check these out, because they're all memorable and interesting experiences. So that's really all there is to say about the games. Thank you for watching. I'm going to give a little bit of an update here. Hopefully this won't take too long. First off, yes, I was working on a review, a long-form review. That was going to be a review of a game called Asura's Wrath, which some of you might be familiar with. That review has been canceled. And the reason that it's been canceled is because, I got very close to finishing the script, and then one day I kind of just realized, I don't really care. I don't care anymore. There's really no point in writing this. So, I just didn't really want to do it anymore. And I think, I had a spark for it when I had played it and was first doing it, but I just think that if I'm going to do a review, it needs to stay relevant to me at all times. It was a game that I thought might be interesting to do a retrospective on, but I realized, no, I didn't have the steam for it. It didn't stick with me enough, and so that's that. So I know it's been a while since there's been a real review, and I think I just need to think harder about what sorts of reviews I want to do. What sorts of videos I think are worth doing. Because if I'm being honest, I don't, I always wanted to make videos that I would watch. And the reality is, I don't watch videos about video games much. Like, almost never. And that's been the case for many years, so this is not like a totally new thing. And so, there's a part of me that's like, maybe I should just make different kinds of videos. And if I do that, that's going to be on a totally different channel. It's not going to be connected to this. But that's a different sort of thing to think about. There are videos I absolutely do want to make that will be made on this channel. So don't worry about that. There's certain plans I have that I want to see through. I just think I need to be a little more careful about what I do. I don't want to get into the point of making a video because I feel like I have to make a video. I need to make sure that I want to do it. If I want to make a video every month because I want to, and I have ideas that I want to see through, it'll happen. But there's not going to be regularly scheduled content just for the sake of regularly scheduled content. This is a small channel. I don't really worry too much about the analytics or any of that crap. So that's just something I want to make sure people are aware of. So I can't really give any kind of update on what's coming down the pipe. There's a couple ideas I got, but we'll see. We'll see. But I want to thank you for watching all the way through. I want to thank everybody who has supported. I don't intend on just keeping people high and dry or anything like that. It's just that, life takes you down interesting turns where you end up doing things you didn't expect. And in many ways, that's where I am right now. So, yeah. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.